Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. The behind-the-scenes blame game is in full swing here in Washington after the Obamacare repeal's failure. The president immediately blamed the Democrats, but it was his own party, largely a coalition of House conservatives known as the Freedom Caucus, who refused to support the bill. We begin with Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, who was a vocal critic of the bill. Senator, welcome. In the Washington Examiner, Philip Klein writes, or the headline to his piece is, GOP cave on Obamacare repeal is the biggest broken promise in political history. What's your reaction to that judgment?
Well, John, first I'd say the president is right that the Democrats gave us Obamacare, and the failure of this bill this week doesn't solve the problems of Obamacare. It's continuing to get worse, and our healthcare system is groaning under the weight of Obamacare. So we have to revisit it. We now have the time to do it in a more deliberate and careful fashion. But ultimately, I don't think you can lay the defeat of this bill last week on any single faction in the House of Representatives. Some conservatives opposed it, some moderates opposed it, even chairmen of powerful committees opposed it. I just think the problem was with first the bill and then the process. Healthcare is a very complicated issue. To release a bill that was written in secret and then expect to pass it in 18 days, I just don't think was feasible.
So you said written in secret. Well, that's on Paul Ryan then. I mean, he controls that process. So are you saying basically that the House leaders, the House Speaker, did it, the process was poorly handled?
I think you can't expect to try to solve a problem that addresses 1/6 of the country's economy and touches every American in a very personal and intimate way in 18 days. You know, when the Democrats came to power in 2009, for 60 years at least, they had been pursuing a national health care system. Yet they didn't introduce legislation for 8 months. They didn't pass it for over a year of Barack Obama's first term. So they went through very public hearings and took testimony, developed a fact-based foundation of knowledge. President Obama traveled around the country, held town halls. He spoke to a joint session of Congress. I'm not saying that we needed 14 months to do this, but I think a more careful and deliberate approach, which we now have time to do, because we're going to have to revisit healthcare anyway, would have gotten us further down the path towards a solution. I believe that both conservatives and moderates in the House made a lot of concessions already. And I have friends like Jim Jordan in the Freedom Caucus and Charlie Dent in the Tuesday group. And I know that they're both good men. They want to work together. They want to try to find a solution that both they and everyone in between can agree to. With time, I think we can do that.
So your judgment, just so nobody mistakes your message, is that the House rushed it?
I think the House moved a bit too fast.
Okay.
18 days is simply not enough time for such major landmark legislation.
The president this morning, though, is actually pointing fingers at the Freedom Caucus. He says, quote, Democrats are smiling in D.C. that the Freedom Caucus, with the help of the Club for Growth and Heritage, have saved Planned Parenthood and Obamacare. What do you think about that?
Again, it wasn't just conservatives in the House. In fact, I think more non-conservatives than conservatives opposed it. And when you lose the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, one of the most powerful positions, the problem really is not with a specific faction in the House. I think it's with the bill.
Let me get your experience from that town hall that everybody saw. There was a woman who stood up and said that she would be dead were not for Obamacare. The president has said that he's going to wait for Obamacare to explode and collapse, and then it will get fixed. How would that go over with that woman at that town hall or the other people?
Well, I think the president is simply stating a fact that Obamacare continues to get worse. Premiums continue to go up every year when you get to new open enrollment season. Many counties across the country have only one insurer, which means an insurance company has a monopoly over your care. Now, what can happen in the short term while the Congress is continuing to deliberate about health care is what was being called Phase 2. Secretary of Health and Human Services Tom Price can undertake regulations designed to lift some of the worst harms of Obamacare and try to give some people relief. Later this year, we have must-pass health care legislation that's coming up, the Children's Health Insurance Program, which is very important to a lot of Democrats. By that point, I hope that we can reach some kind of consensus where we can try to do away with the worst problems of Obamacare that can only be addressed by legislation.
Here's what I wonder about is the people at the end of this, at the end of these policies, and that you dealt with in those town halls, is when they hear the president say, I'm going to let it collapse, and then the Democrats will beg me to fix it. But what people who are out there nervous about this, who have Obamacare, who don't have Obamacare, people who are just straight up nervous, Isn't that a nervous-making thing to hear?
Well, as I said at all my town halls, I say anytime Obamacare comes up as a topic in Arkansas, I know that some people were helped by Obamacare. There's no doubt about that. But many more were hurt by it. And those are the people who we need to keep in mind when we're trying to solve the problems for people who benefited from Obamacare without imposing all the costs that Obamacare did. And the president is simply stating a fact that the entire healthcare system is groaning under the weight of Obamacare. We don't have a choice to revisit or not revisit it. We have to revisit it.
Let me ask you finally about Mosul. There are reports that 200 civilians have been killed as a result of a bombing in Mosul, perhaps from the American air mission there. Is this a result of the loosening of rules of engagement, and how should people think about this?
It's a very sad development. Obviously, the Department of Defense is investigating. I don't believe this is the result of any kind of loosening of rules of engagement. Rather, I think it's simply the facts on the ground. For much of the last part of last year, the fighting was in East Mosul, which is a much smaller, less densely populated area. Now the fighting is in West Mosul, which is a much more densely populated area. Ultimately, though, the blame lays with the Islamic State. They are the savages that are fighting from civilian locations like apartment buildings and homes, mosques, hospitals, schools, and so forth. The blame does not lay with coalition pilots or with Iraqi forces. An investigation will occur, but ultimately it's the terrorists who are using civilians as shield that are responsible for those deaths.
All right, Senator Cotton, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, John.